conformity. A lot of us for no action. How's it going?
Good evening, Patch people. I'm so excited to be here with you tonight once again. We don't have a whole lot to cover this evening because when I went to the Daily Mail this evening, the headline was about Gwyneth Paltrow and that ridiculous trial she's involved in. So it's safe to assume that there is nothing happening in the world today. But we do have some really good news coming from the GOP for a change, which is a really nice change of pace. So we're going to unpack that for sure. We're going to be talking about a lot about public schools this evening. I think what we're going to do after we're done with that is probably just wrap it because I am tired. I'm not sure why, but sometime around 3 p.m. today, I just hit a wall and I was like, I cannot do this anymore. And I don't really want to drink more coffee that late in the day. So here I am just kind of dragging along. But the first question, the question I asked in the poll this evening is, let's see what we've got here. 55% say no to the question, when you die, would you want to compost yourself? So we have no at 55% and what at 27%. Only 18% of people said yes. So we are going to look at today's first story, the opener today. Yeah, see here, this is all about Gwyneth Paltrow. Here at the bottom of the page, it's this ridiculous pop-up chyron. Yeah, see, Gwyneth Paltrow takes a stand in Utah trial. Nobody cares about that. It's not important, but it was the headline on the Daily Mail, so nothing's happening. So we're going to talk about what happened yesterday. This headline was really interesting to me and kind of grabbed my attention because I think it speaks to a much deeper issue than just composting ourselves. So this is the headline: Green burial alternatives, human composting get a hard no from Catholic bishops. The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops says green alternatives do not show due respect to human remains. Interesting. A large faith conference is pushing back on green composting as a way to handle human remains. It is improper to compost human remains as the practice is disrespectful to the body of the deceased, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops said in a statement released Thursday, March 23rd. The guidance offered by the congregation, regarding burial and cremation reflects the church's overarching concern that due respect be shown to the bodily remains of the deceased in a way that gives visible witness to our faith and hope in the resurrection of the body, said the statement authored by the conference's Doctrine Committee. Unfortunately, two of the most prominent newer methods for disposition of bodily remains that are proposed as alternative to burial and cremation, alkaline hydrolysis and human composting, fail to meet this criterion. In 2019, Washington became the first state to legalize human composting. Black. Since then, Colorado, Oregon, Vermont, California, and New York have also legalized the practice, according to the Smithsonian Magazine. A 2022 survey from the National Funeral Directors Association found that 60.5% would be interested in green funeral options, an increase from 55.7% the prior year. And this is right in line with people trying to be more conscious about what they do as far as stuff like climate change is concerned. It is believed that the cost of traditional funerals as well as the chemicals required for embalming are leading some to consider this option. What is human composting? The bishops took issue with what happens to the human body after undergoing human composting or alkaline hydrolysis. As opposed to cremation, where all human remains are gathered together and reserved for disposition, alkaline hydrolysis and composting require that the remains be essentially scattered, they said. After the alkaline hydrolysis process, there are also remnants of the bones that can be pulverized and placed into an urn. That is not all that remains, however, they said in the statement. Alkaline hydrolysis also produces 100 gallons of liquid that was formerly human remains. This is truly disgusting, and I'm sorry to inflict this upon you guys. I just found it very interesting. We're going to talk about some of the cultural implications of funerals because this is about more than just the church. This liquid is treated as wastewater and poured down the drain into the sewer system. In certain cases, it's treated as fertilizer and spread over a field or forest, something that does not show adequate respect for the human body nor express hope in the resurrection, said the bishops. I have to agree with them on that. That seems highly disrespectful, not to mention really, really just gross. The same is true for human composting, which leaves nothing less left but compost, nothing that one can point to and identify as remains of a body. The conference statement added that the body and the plant material have all decomposed together to yield a single mass of compost. What is left is approximately a cubic yard of compost that one is invited to spread on a lawn or in a garden or in some wilderness location, something that the bishops say is not sufficiently respectful of the human body. And again, I'm pretty amenable to that idea. That doesn't seem very respectful at all. The body is completely disintegrated, said the bishops. There is nothing distinguishably left of the body to be placed in a casket or an urn and laid to rest in a sacred place where Christian faithful can visit for prayer and remembrance. In the Catholic Church, burial is considered the most appropriate way of manifesting reverence and respect for the body of the deceased. It also, quote, clearly expresses our faith and hope in the resurrection of the body. While cremation is permitted as long as it is not chosen for reasons contrary to Christian doctrine, said the bishops, it is not permissible to scatter the ashes of the deceased, divide them among family members and friends, or store them at home. That's a very interesting point that I was curious about because I was thinking, if they have an issue with like composting human remains, they should also technically have an issue with scattering ashes, right? And apparently they do. Cremated remains must be put in a sacred place, usually a cemetery, though it could possibly be a church or some other area that has been set aside for this purpose and so dedicated by the competent ecclesial authority, noted the bishops. Doing this shows our respect for the last remains of the deceased and manifests our Christian hope in the resurrection of the body, they also said. So this is a very interesting topic. I know it's a little bit kind of gross and grisly at times, but I think we all need to come to terms with the idea that we're going to die in the future, even though it can be hard for some of us to think about. Especially those of us who have older parents or grandparents who have passed on, definitely something to consider because it is unavoidable unless, as Christians believe Jesus might come back, and certain parts of Christianity believe that there will be a rapture where the faithful are taken just straight up to heaven without having to worry about dying. I don't believe that's possible. I don't think that's likely to happen. I would need firm evidence of that from the Bible, but that's a little off in the weeds. I think that this is very important to remember when we talk about respecting human life, because I look at it from the pro-life position where we care about people before they're born. But then when you get to the end of life, the natural end of human life, you need to consider also respecting human life. And the fact of the matter is that if a soul inhabited a body, we need to consider that that body was somehow important to the role that God had for it. So I think that this is completely fair. I think this is totally in keeping with Catholic faith, probably also in keeping with much of Protestantism, although less emphasis, I think, is placed on the manner in which ashes, for example, are preserved in the Protestant church. But at the same time, I'm not sure. I just think that everybody should keep in mind that we're all going to die. It's something that we need to come to terms with. When I worked in a nursing home, it was very, very hard to see old people struggling and stuttering at the end of their lives, and their younger children, the younger parts of their family, would absolutely categorically refuse to give them any peace or to let them go, so to speak, because I'm not superstitious, but there certainly is a line between a parent and their child where the child needs to essentially give consent for the parent to depart. It's very interesting. It's not really something that I can explain fully. When you work in the field, you start to recognize that there are things that we can't fully explain. And I think that's fair and safe to say in pretty much any circumstance, which is why I can't fully rule out things like, I don't know, maybe ghosts stick around. Who knows? Maybe they're not allowed into heaven. Maybe they just feel like hanging out where they lived. Any of that stuff, I don't know anything about that. We will find out more about that maybe when we die, if there is a God who wants to explain that to us. But there is certainly something to be said for allowing your parents to depart in peace. It's just something that needs to be done. But what I saw with younger generations was that they were fully unable to consider the fact that their parent might actually pass away. And when your parent is 80, 85 plus, that really becomes something that you need to take into account because you are dealing with their end of life. I'm sorry, it's very sad. It's hard, I know. And it's a difficult thing for any child to deal with for their parent. But at the same time, if they are 80 or 85, they've already had a long life and they've been very lucky and they've had you, obviously, so they're the luckiest person on earth. So you need to consider the impact that end of life has on people and you need to come to terms with it ideally before your person dies, which I know is very hard to do. Especially, I'm not even talking about spouses here. I'm just talking about parents. Spouses are a completely different ball of wax, let alone children. I always say that no parent should outlive their children. That is a very, very hard thing, and you will miss them 100% sure forever. But let's see what you guys are thinking about this. It's kind of an interesting topic. I just wanted to open with it because I found it so interesting. Hello, Sir of Potatoes. Let's see here. Serenko says, yes, you in Arizona. Chucky pointed out your daylight standard times is effing me up. Here it is now 4:52. We do not change our hours. Yes, Arizona is a special state in that regard. They don't do this daylight saving times thing. I personally don't think that the rest of the states should either, but here we are. JJR says, I don't trust it. How far is this from Soylent Green? That is a great question. I personally think that this thing really speaks to this consciousness and this conscience that people have recently developed over climate change. But at the same time, you have to know that their entire, they're called ossuaries, where people of faith who were buried a long time ago, once it's been like 50 or 60 years after they're gone, they say, okay, we're running out of room, but because we respect the physical, manifestation of this person, we're not going to throw them away or something. We're going to dig up their remains because there are calcified remains that remain, obviously, you know how human bodies work, and we're going to put them all into something called an ossuary. And there's actually one in Poland that's fascinating. Let me see if I can find this ossuary. Polish. I think I'm pronouncing it right. I'm probably not. Let's see here. Polish. Okay. Yes. So this is called Bartholomew's Ossuary, the Skull Chapel, located in the Shermna district of Kurma. These are Polish words. I have no idea what I'm saying. This is so interesting. So these are the remains of people from like hundreds of years back, and it's really pretty awe-inspiring. This was actually one of the places that I wanted to go. I think a lot of people think it would be creepy, but to me it's fascinating, not just because I studied bone structure, anatomy, and physiology and stuff like that, but because there's so much history packed into one place. And I think most people would find this rather macabre, but I think that it would be truly awe-inspiring and overwhelming to go into this room and look at each one of these faces and think about the lives that these people led. And that is just such a crazy, like the weight of time in that room has to be immense. So really interesting. That's something that they do. It's not Soylent Green. It's not composting. This is really how they kind of keep the memories of these people around, even hundreds possibly of years after they're gone. Very interesting way to do that. Anyway, just thought that was super, super interesting. Serenko says, I think they permit it since for dust you are and dust you shall return. Yes, but they don't want you to scatter them. They want you to keep it together because you're trying to still respect the person's body even after the soul has departed. Nightmare says, I want to read a quote that says, man hoards his dead, and they were talking about trying to avoid death by preventing the human body from absorbing into the earth. Interesting idea. I once read. I'm not sure where that's from. That's a very interesting quote, though. Chucky says, as long as they can tax you for eternity, it is okay. I don't think they can do that. My money pretty much ends when I do. Serenko says Genesis 3:19. So we are going to look that up. If I can spell Genesis 3:19. Here we go. Yes. Okay. So in the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread till thou return unto the ground, for out of it wast thou taken, for dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return. Very surprised they have the King James Version front and center on that one. King James Version is not popular anymore. It's very arduous to read. But yes, great point. I think that's a really good way to think about it. There's a lot to think about here for sure. I know that everybody has lost someone, so it's certainly been at the top of our minds, at least at some point in the past. JJR says, I believe the Jewish faith has a serious problem with cremation. Interesting, likely so. It's a very modern thing. Stuart says that is not respectful. It is bodily resurrection, not gloop or ashes. I am inclined to agree. So I just don't know. It really is very down to your religious beliefs and what you think happens when, at the end of the world or whenever the resurrection is supposed to happen. That I don't recall. Nightmare says, yeah, this is gross. I agree. Like some of the gritty details about hydrolysis or whatever is really disgusting. I mean, there's a lot about the human body that's not particularly glamorous. I learned that working in a hospital, not even just a nursing home, but the hospital itself. I was like, hey, you know what? I deal with it all the time. Don't worry about it. Nobody ever needs to be embarrassed. Just, it ain't nothing but a thing. Just these things happen. But people do feel very sensitive about this stuff, and it's not something you really want to engage with. Chucky says, 2 guarantees in life, death and taxes. Correct. God said, from dust you are, dust you shall return. Exactly. But the greenies will be against cremation because of the combustion process and the fuel required to do it. That's possibly why this kind of composting stuff is being pushed. I just thought the composting idea was kind of interesting. I think it's really kind of just accelerating the way that people naturally decompose, but it is rather unnatural. I would rather be like, I don't know. I have no idea. I haven't considered that far ahead. At the end of the day, I don't really care because after I'm gone, I'm gone. I don't care what happens to me. So I don't really want like a Viking funeral or anything like that. I knew people who really wanted a Viking funerals and stuff like that, and I thought that was great. But at the end of the day, I really don't really care because whatever. People talk about, well, I don't want to lie in a box for forever or whatever. I'm like, you're not lying in a box for forever. You are already gone. You don't need to worry about it. None of this makes any difference at all to you anymore. Wherever you ended up, whatever you believe about the afterlife, you don't have to worry about this particular mortal plane anymore, which is a weight off, honestly. You can get ashes cremated into a diamond now and worn as jewelry. Yes, that's very interesting too. And I doubt the Catholic Church cares much for that either. That strikes me as actually a little macabre because you're trying to turn a person into a thing. And that I don't really like because from my understanding, so I don't know if you guys have ever read Terry Pratchett. I loved him. He's like the ultimate libertarian. He actually did opt for assisted suicide very early on because he had early onset dementia in his 60s. Very, very sad. Made me really think hard about that when I was first engaging with that idea. But he said that his definition of sin was treating people as objects. So treating people as objects. And I found that fascinating. So now anytime I see something like, oh, it's my grandfather's skull or whatever, I'm like, you just turned this person into something of an object that now you might use for something. That's very, very strange to me. Very foreign to me. That's weirder and grosser than a chapel made out of bones because at least those bones are being respected and there's that weight of history and those memories of all those people. But yeah, hello, Psycho Clown. Welcome to the crew. Yeah, for sure. Dr. John, D. John T, excuse me, can't read. The question is wrong. I don't care what happens to the body when I die. It's not you who lie there dead. It's your body. You have gone somewhere else. That's a good point. And that's a point that I basically just made. I don't really care what happens to me after I'm gone. It's not a big deal. I would like to donate my physical vessel to feed the sharks. Interesting idea. Lots of people donate their physical form to science, which was great for me when I was learning anatomy and physiology, and honestly, very sobering to be like, oh, so that's what that's like. Even though I had personally cared for people who died in my care, typically at night, typically very, very late at night. There's a certain time. This hasn't really made me superstitious, but I saw these patterns. Like people would die at 2 or 3 in the morning. There was like a very certain time that people were just at their weakest. And that's actually something you read about in the Bible. Is that, I believe it was David who would talk about not the witching hour, but there was a point in time when you're at your weakest and you're most vulnerable at night. Very, very interesting ideas. Anyway, we've gotten distracted a little bit like this and gotten carried away. Stuart says we were created bodily from the earth, yet given a soul. Our resurrection is for a new earth and a new heaven. That's a good point too. Something the church might do well to remember. Anheil says, howdy from Tucson. Hello, Arizonans. Welcome in. Feel free to rub it in that you don't have to do the daylight saving things like the rest of us plebs. All right, you guys, we have good news, not creepy news on this count. Parents' Bill of Rights wins 0 votes from Democrats who attack it as fascism, an extreme attack on schools. The bill is the GOP's response to growing anger about lack of access to school information across the nation. And I have to say, I am proud of the GOP for responding to actual things that actual voters care about. Baby steps, guys. We're going to take what we can get and we're going to go with it. I thought it was great. I think that the conversation about it was really important. Let's see if we can watch this video and see if we can hear what Mike Johnson from Louisiana has to say. Maybe not. Might not load. Let's see.
Let's see what Democrats were saying yesterday about this bill, because you hear the back and forth from Congressman Scalise about why they couldn't get some sort of common ground on this. Here's what they had to say.
Bills like this make schools more hostile, and make no mistake, it results in hate, bigotry, and yes, sometimes death of our students in schools.
It has everything to do with jamming the extreme MAGA Republican ideology down the throats of the children and the parents.
When we talk about progressive values, I can say what my progressive value is, and that is freedom over fascism.
Okay, Congressman Mike Johnson, Louisiana Republican, member of the House Armed Services and House Judiciary Committees, also chairman of the Subcommittee on Constitution and Limited Government, and a member of the Subcommittee on Weaponization of Federal Government. That's a lot of committees. Good to see you, sir. Thank you for being here today.
Hey,
explain to people at home, as they hear both sides of this, they hear sort of an argument from Kevin McCarthy and Steve Scalise that this is just good common sense for our schools. Then you hear the other side that says that this is going to promote hate and even death. Explain to people what this bill that you all just passed, what does it actually do?
Listen, I think the comments from our Democrat colleagues speak for themselves. It's patently absurd that they would say such things, that we would even need to have the vote that we had today, Martha. Look, the Supreme Court has acknowledged for more than a century the obvious fact that parents have a fundamental and constitutional right to make the decisions with regard to the care and custody and control of their own children. They should be able to go and exercise the First Amendment rights to go to a school board meeting and advocate for curriculum decisions and other things. But Washington Democrats and their allies on the left believe they know better than parents, and they have been trying to censor and silence parents' views, keep them out of these decisions. We passed legislation today to affirm once again what has always been known in this country and acknowledged widely until today.
Yeah, he's entirely correct. And what was really interesting to me was that Democrats did not engage with this in good faith. So this is how you know you have a winning argument. When the Democrats come out and say things like, pretty much just like extended screaming, a lot of, hyperbolic postulation about things like fascism. And somebody pointed out, Serenko said that AOC clearly doesn't understand the definition of the word fascism. I don't think many people do. In fact, let's look up a definition right now because I am curious. Fascism, the meaning of the word fascism, often capitalized a political philosophy, movement, or regime that exalts nation and often race above the individual and that stands for a centralized autocratic government headed by a dictatorial leader, severe economic and social regimentation, and forcible suppression of opposition. Now, I don't want to point fingers, but saying that we should be divided along racial lines doesn't sound like anything coming from the right now. Neither does having a super authoritarian government. It is very clear to me. I know there is contested definitions of fascism, but it's very clear to me that no, AOC does not know what it means. They're just pulling it out because this is what they always do when they come up against something that they cannot argue against, and they know it. And that's why I say it's a good thing that they're throwing this at the wall. It's not going to stick. No one believes them. That's a crazy thing to say. We all know this. It doesn't make a difference. One of the things, we're going to talk about what Kayleigh Mcenany had to say. She's great. I always thought she was awesome. She reminded me of a debater with her huge binders of evidence. So let's finish this article and we'll look at what she said. House voted to pass the Parents' Bill of Rights Act on Friday over objections from Democrats who argued the bill aimed at promoting fascism and extreme views of Republicans by making it easier for parents to ban books and out LGBTQ plus students. The GOP bill is a response to a growing anger across the country, I have hiccups, about access to information on everything from school curricula to safety and mask policies that the prevalence of gender ideology and critical race theory in the classroom. Parents' anger over these issues at school board meetings led to an effort by the Biden administration's Justice Department to examine the disturbing trend of, quote, violent threats against school officials. Remember, they debated whether they should consider these parents actual terrorists. So this is what we're up against. House Republicans reacted by approving the Parents' Bill of Rights Act, which would require school districts to give parents access to curriculum and reading lists and would require schools to inform parents if school staff begin encouraging or promoting a child's gender transition. The bill passed narrowly in a 213 to 208 vote that saw just a handful of Republicans vote against it, along with every Democrat. Democrats blasted the bill during debate this week by accusing Republicans of attacking LGBTQ plus students because this is the emotional appeal. These poor children, how dare you attack them? I believe it was Blair White who said, a trans child is like a vegan cat. You know who's making the decisions. It is not the cat. It is not the child. And Matt Walsh, I agree with him when he says there is no such thing as a trans child. There is only really an abused child. Let's be serious, because if you are indoctrinating your child into this kind of mindset, you are 100% abusing them. You are treating your child like an accessory. And I don't really care if that gets me demonetized, because it's true. This Republican bill is asking the government to force the outing of LGBT people before they're ready, AOC argued on the House floor. When we talk about progressive values, I can say what my progressive value is, and that is freedom over fascism. Okay, it doesn't make sense. Republicans rejected this argument by saying parents have the right to know what is happening to their children in school, especially if schools are promoting gender transition without their knowledge. I think that's fair. The bill does not address a student's identity or statements, but is solely focused on notifying parents about actions taken by school personnel to act on gender transition, such as changing pronouns or switching locker rooms, said Representative Virginia Fox, who chairs the Committee on Education and the Workforce. The bill says parents have the right to know if a school employee or contractor acts to change a minor child's gender markers, pronouns, or preferred name, or allow a child to change the child's sex-based accommodations, including locker rooms or bathrooms. That is a very, very strong stance to take, and I'm very proud of them for taking it, because if you guys recall, in Virginia, one of the things that really blew up down there, and one of the things that got Youngkin elected, was there was a case of a trans-identifying male going into a female bathroom and sexually assaulting a student, and then the school covered that up and transferred the male student to a different school where the same thing happened again. Parents were righteously furious about this. And this is pretty much where it came down from. And it's really disingenuous of Democrats not to acknowledge that. But here we go. Extreme MAGA Republicans don't want the children of America to learn about the Holocaust, accused House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. They want to ban a book called Melissa, a book describing in very personal terms the experience of a trans girl beginning to understand her identity. They're not banning anything. Parents can still get those books from the public library. They will not be in school libraries where children can view them without parental knowledge or permission. That's it. That's all. And that's the only real comeback you need for this kind of thing. They're not banning books. The books will still be printed. They simply will not be placed into public school classrooms, at least not in smart places like Florida. More on them later. They want to ban books. They want to bully the community. They want to bring guns into classrooms, kindergarten and above. That's their educational agenda, he added, not hyperbolic at all. Republicans dismissed those arguments by saying the bill does nothing to ban books, but does give parents the right to see a list of books in school libraries and access those books. So what is the argument against that? Representative Jeffries, where's the problem there? Why should parents not know what's being taught in their kids' schoolrooms? I'm not seeing it. Nowhere in this bill is it banning any books, asserted Ralph Norman from South Carolina, who said the goal of the language was to make sure parents were aware of sexually explicit books in school libraries. I mean, Duh. Norman and others also argued that the books under attack in some states and communities are those that include explicit sexual content and they say is not appropriate for certain ages and is not a core educational requirement. Norman cited books that talk about kids who are sexually active from the time I was 6 or that include explicit images of oral engagement. Parents, is this something you want your children to read? Norman asked. Parents, is this something that encourages academics and allows children to compete in the 21st century? Of course it's not. There is no case that can be made that this has anything to even do with education, and Democrats know this. This is not about education any longer. This is 100% indoctrination into their Marxist-leaning ideology, and they know, because the left doesn't tend to have children, they tend to abort them. They know that if they can get your children, they don't need to have their own. So this is a very, very important bill. Chucky says indoctrination is not education. Entirely correct. And I think that Republicans should have really made that clear, but they did have a bunch of good responses to a lot of these silly arguments. Now, Kayleigh Mcenany had a really, really good response to Hakeem Jeffries. Kayleigh Mcenany slams top House Democrat for malicious lie on GOP's parental rights bill. Representative Hakeem Jeffries claimed Republicans don't want children to learn about the Holocaust. Outnumbered co-host Kayleigh Mcenany fired back at House Democrats' insane criticism of Republicans' newly passed parental bill of rights Friday, accusing Representative Hakeem Jeffries of telling a malicious lie in his speech on the House floor. She said, "Did they all go out drinking together? Because that was insane. That was totally nuts. This line in particular, I want to focus on Hakeem Jeffries for a second because he is the top House Democrat, right? So the highest there is. For him to make the claim extreme MAGA Republicans don't want children of America to learn about the Holocaust, what a malicious, egregious, outrageous lie." And I don't use that word lightly, but that is a lie. Democrats and Republican leaders took turns accusing the other party of being extreme after the House of Representatives passed the Parents' Bill of Rights, mostly along party lines. And she mentioned Hakeem Jeffries, but I personally want to bring up, I believe it was Sheila Jackson Lee. I'm not sure. Don't kill me if I got that wrong, but there was a representative who came out and said that we should be teaching kindness. We should be teaching the history of slavery. First of all, school doesn't ever teach you kindness. School is where you go to bully and learn how to bully. Period. And we have an article to that effect later on. You are not going to like it. It's going to make you furious, but this is one of the things that happens at public schools. Lots of this bullying. There is no kindness taught in any public school system, period. But what she was saying about slavery is incredibly silly because I personally would love for slavery to be taught in its full context in all schools everywhere in the U.S. I want every child in the U.S. to know everything about slavery, and I do mean everything. I don't want to focus solely on American slavery either. I want to talk about Irish people being enslaved. I want to talk about the root word for slavery, which was actually Slav, because so many Slavic people were sold into slavery, and so many Arabic traders came up and got white people to sell into slavery as time rolled on. I want to talk about the African tribal leaders who sold their fellow tribe members into slavery for a quick buck. And I want to, for sure, talk about the fact that the West ended slavery when humanity had embraced it for the entirety of human history. I want to talk about the millennia that were spent under the thumb of slavery and how Americans and British leaders ended it. I want full credit given to the people who deserve it. So yes, Sheila Jackson Lee, I want to talk about slavery. And I guarantee you that most right-wingers want to do exactly the same because your ideology holds no power when children are given the full context of slavery right from the beginning, which was thousands and thousands of years ago. This did not start in America. It did not start in Britain, but that is where it ended. And I want children to know about that because that puts the nail in the coffin of your leftist ideology. And I don't think they would come back from that. So anyway, that's my little rant about slavery. I heard Matt Walsh mention something similar, so I really wanted to delve into that because I feel exactly the same way. The history of slavery is not something that is in any way confined to the U.S. The U.S. was, in fact, the country that ended it. I think, you know what, let me look at who ended it first. It was either the U.S. or the U.K. Who ended slavery? Not Abraham Lincoln. Which country? There we go. first. There we go. So, Haiti, okay. Well, I was thinking it was either the UK or the US, but I obviously see we need more education about slavery. That's what I'm saying. Let me see. Did the US or the UK end slavery first? So, in 1808, they passed legislation banning the slave trade, effectively from the start of 1808. Yes, of course, the U.S. was not the first or only country to abolish slavery, but it's interesting to me that Reuters even feels the need to publish that little fact check because it means they realize that people are questioning it for the fact that some countries still have slavery and they are not white countries. And I think we should unpack that very thoroughly since the Democrats are so gung-ho about teaching this kind of history. Let's get into it, guys. All right, you guys, Florida is doing great things. Florida legislature sends universal school choice bill to DeSantis' desk. This is from just yesterday, I think. So wonderful news on that front. They join a group of states who are doing the same thing, and I literally could not be happier. I remember always being frustrated, even from a really young age, that my parents had to pay money to a system that their children never ever use because neither I nor my 5 siblings ever set foot in a public school building. And we also know for a fact, looking at these LA school strikes, that they earn $30,000 per child per year, which is much more expensive than even the nicest school. Like some of these seriously fancy private schools don't even cost that much, but instead what you get in return is a filled public education, including like something like 40% graduation rate, and these ridiculous reading rates that shame a third world country. Like, holy cow, some third world countries are more literate than some of the students who graduate from these American schools. That should be utterly humiliating to the US and especially to teachers who think that they are far more important than their students. Oh, interesting. Okay. A universal school choice bill is headed to the desk of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis after the state Senate passed the legislation on a 26-12 vote Thursday. Once the governor's signature is affixed to the legislation, Florida will become the 4th state this year to enact a universal school choice program after similar bills passed in Utah, Iowa, and Arkansas. Wonderful. Why homeschool advocates are lobbying hard against universal school choice bills. Very interesting. The legislation, which expands an existing school choice program to all K-12 students, will allow families to use state funds to pay for private school tuition, home tutoring, and other school expenses. The bill had been marked as HB 1, signifying its priority in the legislative session. The state house passed the bill last week on an 83-27 vote. The Florida model factors in the unique learning needs of every child to deliver education by empowering parents and students to choose the best way to achieve their educational goals, regardless of zip code, race, or income. Conservative school choice activists celebrated the passage of the bill, saying it further solidifies Florida as a national leader in educational freedom. Governor DeSantis and legislative leaders in the House, like House Speaker Paul Renner, as well as Senate President Kathleen Passidomo, deserve great credit for advancing policies that put students and families first, Heritage Foundation education experts Lindsay Burke and Jason Bedrick said in a statement. By expanding the state's innovative education savings accounts policy to all K-12 students, Florida likely will retain its position as one of the best states in the nation for education freedom. The bill has been continually opposed by state teachers unions, including the Florida Education Association, because, again, they only care about teachers, not at all about students. They only care about their paycheck, not about the children they are supposed to be teaching, which said the bill will direct billions of taxpayer dollars to unaccountable private corporate-run schools at the expense of the neighborhood public schools that serve most of our kids. Here's a solution. No one goes to public schools anymore. Everyone goes to private or charter or home schools or pod schools. There are a bunch of different options that nobody ever examines because they are taught wrongly, but by the educational system, that there is only one option. Well, what we find when there's only one option, if you've ever had to use a public utility, is that this is a horrible idea for actually getting good results. What we need is competition. And we need to understand that even though that might be challenging to transition to, it's something that we need to pursue 100%, especially if we care about the future of our children. Now, if you want to send your kid to public school, this might be what you're in for. A North Carolina teacher resigned after taping an 11-year-old's mouth shut. He was humiliated. The North Carolina teacher resigned days after the incident. A North Carolina mother is speaking out after her son sent her a photo from his classroom showing his mouth taped shut in a disciplinary measure taken by his teacher. Catherine Webster told WRAL-TV that her 11-year-old son, Brady, had sent a photo last month from his Smithfield Middle School 6th grade classroom showing his mouth covered with several strips of blue painter's tape over his mouth after he allegedly had been too talkative in class. I don't know what to do, Brady's text message to his mother said. He was humiliated, she told the outlet. Webster told Fox News Digital that her son had been taped at the beginning of the class and forced to sit through the entire period like that, and that 2 of his classmates had also been taped the same day. It had been going on for a while before this day, Webster said of the alleged disciplinary measure. His teacher never once called me to discuss his behavior, so I wasn't aware it was a problem for her. So here are his text messages. He says, here's this picture of him. He says, I don't know what to do. What is that? Who did that? Who did that? Is that tape? I'm on my way, says his mother, like a good mother should. She immediately took the issue to the principal's office and an investigation was launched. WRAL-TV reported that the teacher who had just been hired in August 2022 had resigned February 17th, just days after the photo was taken. We can confirm that whenever such allegations arise, our administration responds swiftly by investigating the allegations and sometimes by removing staff from classrooms pending completion of a thorough review. An investigation by the Johnson County Sheriff's Office found that several other allegations against the teacher had been made, but determined after consulting with the district attorney that the assault charge was not warranted, according to WRAL. Webster told Fox News Digital she is satisfied with the way the principal acted immediately to ensure the teacher was not in class the next day, but is speaking out now to call for accountability so that this situation can't happen again in the future, and the teacher is not allowed to simply move to another jurisdiction. Although I notice they don't use the name of the teacher, so that's not really helping her case there very much, is it? I wanted to highlight that story because I know this is a public school. That's not cool. You kind of know what you're getting when you decide to send your kid to one of these schools, and it's pretty much luck of the draw whether they get a good teacher. They're probably not going to. We have to be honest. But I thought it was really interesting because I feel like conservatives' initial response to this would probably be, oh, you know what? That kid should have known better. That kid should have kept his mouth shut in class. But I will tell you right now that it is not a teacher's prerogative to function as a parent. Now, if a teacher is having a hard time controlling a parent, this did not happen. The teacher should get in touch with the parents of the student, and then the parents should deal with the kid's behaviors at home. Or better yet, the parents should be the ones, oh gosh, excuse me. I hate when these sites just start talking when you are trying to do something else. So irritating. Let me mute all of these because it's frustrating. Mute other tabs. All right, I'm gonna go. Anyway, yes, I distracted myself. But I do think that this is something that we need to take seriously because there's a cultural issue here when we're just sending our kid out into the wild for 7 to 10 sometimes hours per day to be educated by people who don't care at all about their well-being. And I will say that this teacher did not care about these kids' well-being at all because you don't tape the mouth of somebody that you care about if you do care about them. That's just disgusting. I was grossed out to the max by that. So let me know what you guys think of that. All right, Stuart, thank you for your super chat. I appreciate it. Oh, Stuart says the teacher's name was Dawn Felix. That's good to know. Stuart also says children should be taught all Holocausts, World War II and the communist ones and ones that came before. Also, they should be informed of all other forms of slavery in history. I completely agree. They should be informed about sex slavery, which is something that no one on the left wants to talk about because they want to pretend that sex work is work and they want to overlook the fact that children are forced into it by people they don't even know, or perhaps by people they knew and trusted. They want to pretend that you have a right to do this certain thing when it is clearly objectionably immoral and should never happen to someone underage, nor even really overage. But that's a bigger cultural issue that we should disincentivize. They're using children like handbags. It's horrifying. I entirely agree. Some of the Republicans voted against the bill. Who? I don't know. Probably people along the lines of that lady from Alaska, Susan, Alaska. Oh, crap. I don't know. I know her first name is Susan. Oh, why can't I find this lady's name? You know who I'm talking about. There are a few, Michael Knowles calls them squishes, people who just really go along with whatever the Democrats want them to do. And honestly, I think that that's really kind of, it's so indicative of a serious problem in the Republican Party. And it's what everyone is pretty much mad about all the time when it comes to Republicans, is this squishiness. But just leave us alone equals fascism, says Sorenko. Yeah, exactly. Look up the definition for fascism before the left rewrites it. Yes, so that's exactly something that we did. So we now have it recorded. My dad was dying from cancer. I was with him together with my sisters. When he died, we said goodbye to him, not to his body. We said goodbye to his soul. That's a very good practice. I really like that. That would bring a great deal of comfort to people who have parents who are passing away. My body is donated to the Body Farm in Knoxville, Tennessee. That's a very interesting use of a body. That's actually a very practical use of a body. That's in line with donating your body to science for like dissection or whatever, or examination by medical students. I really appreciated the two individuals who donated their bodies to science when it came to my anatomy and physiology class. It was so interesting to be able to see real actual applications of what was explained to us in the book. To actually be able to see it physically was fascinating. I didn't really like the aspect where the human had to be preserved by pretty much any means necessary, pretty much chemical means, which was really kind of gross and grisly, but at the same time, I really appreciated that they had made the prior determination that that would be what they would do after they died. Oral engagement, lol. Yes, so we try to keep this family friendly over here. It is very hard with some of these books that they're literally pushing into children's libraries at public schools. Not only U.S. slavery, also slavery of the Irish. Yes, mentioned all of that stuff. Sex ed is supposed to be about biology, not sociology. That's a great point too, 100%. Indentured servitude sounds nicer than slavery. Where is my reparations? LOLs. Yeah, for sure. St. Miles says they're afraid the truth would set kids free to think. Exactly. Indeed, they are. Sorenko says, I thought the UK was before the US, but I could be mistaken. Yeah, I'm not sure either. It looks like some of their more minor colonies pushed abolition before they did, but I believe William Wilberforce was one of the biggest voices for that. That was his hill to die on. He did amazing things. Really, really amazing. Sorenko said something that I missed. Let's face it, smart kids are ... Yeah, I'm not sure where it went. I'm very sorry. Yes, thank you, Stuart. Murkowski, yes, Susan Murkowski. She is the one up in Alaska. Susan Alaska, nice name, like a dessert that you order and disappointed you. Yes, for sure. That's exactly what Susan Murkowski is. Speaking of incredibly disappointing women, here we have Randi Weingarten, whom we all know and love as the lady who instantly turns off all the responses to her tweets because she constantly gets flamed. She is the leader of one of the U.S.'s largest teachers' unions, and as I said earlier, they don't at all care about your children. Randi Weingarten torched for saying it's anti-Semitic to mention Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg's ties to Soros. This is something the left constantly tries to say when it comes to Soros's influence. I have news for them. It is not anti-Semitic to point out that someone is pulling the strings for someone who is acting in a politically left-leaning fashion. It's just not. Journalist Doug Powers slammed Weingarten, tweeting, but he is George Soros-backed prosecutor. Teachers Union boss Randi Weingarten received an education of her own recently after suggesting anyone pointing out Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg's ties to liberal billionaire George Soros is being anti-Semitic. Ridiculous, weak, last resort, but they always push it. The head of America's Federation of Teachers, the second largest teachers union in the U.S., tweeted that people connecting Soros money to Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg's office is reflective of a growing wave of anti-Semitic incidents in the U.S. Incorrect. I don't know whether there is an anti-Semitic wave going on in the U.S., but I do know that this is not part of it. Bragg, the DA who has been rumored to be preparing the indictment and arrest of former President Donald Trump for hush money payments he made to Stormy Daniels in 2016, received money from Soros for his DA campaign in 2021. Yes, correct. Fox News Digital reported in May 2021, financier George Soros pushed $1 million to the Color of Change PAC, which turned around and spent big bucks backing the candidacy of Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg. While criticizing Bragg's alleged efforts to indict him, the former president called the DA a Soros-backed animal. That's fascinating because from my understanding, Ron DeSantis also got rid of his own Soros-backed attorney in Florida, who is now trying to sue him for doing that. These guys are everywhere. The guy who is in George Gascon in LA, similarly funded by George Soros. There's a long list of these DAs because George Soros figured out, very, very smart man, figured out that one of the biggest ways to enact changes in the U.S., like to basically destroy the U.S. from the inside out, was to go for the DAs. And that's not really something that anybody else had considered. Very interesting idea, right? Very smart man. And that's who he's been funding. This is what Randi Weingarten said. She's got the Ukraine flag in her bio, a black flexed muscle, and a student with a graduation cap on in her handle. So you know that what she has to say is great. Let's see if she has comments on this. She does not. You can never respond to her tweets because she's weak. She did get 17 likes, which is better than usual. 200 quotes, very nice. Let's look at the quote tweets. This is a result of the division and chaos and fear that the extremists, including the MAGA politicians, wage, like calling the Manhattan DA a George Soros-backed prosecutor. Anti-Semitism incidents hit record in 2022, ADL says. So first of all, that was from a year ago. That is not tied to Donald Trump saying the factual truth that Alvin Bragg was funded by George Soros. And second of all, let's see what other people are saying. I'm sure I will agree with most of them. It's a classic example of the hypocrisy of the lunatic left. First, play the race card. If that doesn't work, play the anti-Semite card. But in this case, Bragg was fully supported by George Soros, who tried to destroy his own country's monetary system. I believe I recall that about Hungary, which is where Soros is initially from. Somebody else asked, I wonder how much Soros has paid her. We don't know. That's not really fair to ask unless you have evidence to back that up. Funny how she won't let anyone comment on this crazy post. She knows she's a liar and a fraud. Absolutely mind-boggling. Someone is clueless and out of touch with reality, such as Randi Weingarten is in charge of any group of organizations. These educated fools are the dumbest logic to argue facts and truths. Plus, DA Barney Fifes is obviously a racist. Randi, what say you? No idea. Why do communist women always look like Tom Petty after a night bender, every single one? I don't think that's fully fair. And I try not to judge people on their looks, but a lot of comments that were not actually comments on this. Oh, here we go from John. George Soros literally writes op-eds taking credit for having spent billions of dollars to influence U.S. politics. Pointing this out is not anti-Semitic. You absolute clown. I'm going to give that one a like because I think he is entirely correct. How about she explain why only 6 out of 100 black kids can do grade level math in Chicago? Lots of very pointed quote tweets for Randi Weingarten, who is not the greatest representative of the education system in the U.S. Thanks. I hate it. She is terrible, but I'm glad it's being brought to light. Speaking of Soros, that was such a good segue. I'm so proud of myself. Missouri's Attorney General sues to remove Soros-funded crime-enabling St. Louis DA. This is a female who went after the couple who tried to defend their own home during the riots. Yes, Kim Gardner. Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey added an additional evidence to his lawsuit Tuesday to remove St. Louis Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner because she, quote, knowingly and willfully failed to do her duties as a prosecutor in many ways. Gardner is the local DA elected with money from George Soros, who prosecuted St. Louis homeowners instead of the Black Lives Matter mob of some 300 rioters who threatened them, filed a blatantly political prosecution of former Missouri Republican Governor Eric Greitens, and allowed criminals to walk free, resulting in a high school volleyball player losing her legs after a released criminal plowed into her with a car. Bailey's suit alleges Gardner's failure to properly execute the duties of her office is so bad she must be removed from office. Bailey grounds the lawsuit's argument in the circuit attorney's constitutional duty. Per the Missouri revised statutes, those duties include to manage and conduct all criminal cases business and proceedings of which the Circuit Court of the City of St. Louis shall have jurisdiction. The new charges in the case result from the State Attorney General's office reviewing some 30,000 documents and interviewing new witnesses, that office says. The new information includes alleging an 8-month backlog on reviewing warrant applications, that Gardner agreed to extraordinary bond reductions, including serious violent crimes, and that because of her gross mismanagement, assistant circuit attorneys are severely overworked and quitting at high rates. While Gardner has been a circuit attorney, the courts in her jurisdiction have dismissed 2,735 criminal cases, the suit says. The majority were dismissed, the complaint argues, due to Gardner's failure to prosecute, her failure to comply with speedy trial requirements, or her failure to comply with discovery obligations. She is a real prize. I don't know if you guys are familiar with her, but if you recall the case of that couple in St. Louis, I cannot remember for the life of me their last name, but they were the couple who went out onto their porch with their 2 little show guns and displayed a remarkable lack of trigger discipline. But at the same time, they had a whole mob of protesters who were just going through their neighborhood, like right in front of their front yard. And it was honestly probably seriously distressing to watch happen. So I completely understand. But she went way out of her way to make sure that they were unduly prosecuted. So I'm not sure what exactly we expected from her, given that she is a Soros attorney. Let me look up DeSantis Soros funded attorney, Florida. Let's see here if we can find that. No, that's not what I want. We're going to go to DeSantis attorney sues in Florida, something like that. Prosecutor's lawsuit against DeSantis gets fast-tracked on appeal. Let's see. Yes, Andrew Warren. Yes. Okay, so Andrew Warren backed by Soros? Question mark. Florida governor ousts Soros-supported prosecutor. Fascinating. So they had one even in Florida. If they have one in Florida, you better believe they can have one everywhere. No, I will not subscribe today. Thank you. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is unambiguously pro-police and pro-public safety. On August 4th, 2022, he traveled to Tampa and took to the podium to announce the official removal of Hillsborough County. So it wasn't the state, was it Hillsborough County State Attorney Andrew Warren? I'm not sure which it is. It's not like the State Attorney General or is it the DA? I'm not sure. A George Soros-backed prosecutor for undoing tons of police work by letting criminals walk and refusing to prosecute certain violations of state statutes. And in fact, I believe what pushed him over the limit was when he said that he would not prosecute people who broke Florida's laws, which is really, holy cow, that's such a violation of their commitment to doing their job. I'm not at all surprised that people are not amused with him, and I'm not at all surprised that Soros was that DeSantis was ready to remove him. In fact, I'm very, very glad that he did so. I hope more states follow in his footsteps like Missouri. All right, you guys, we made it almost to 7. We're going to read what you guys have to say and see where we go from there, and then we'll wrap it up for sure. Or Adrian says, finally, I made it while she's live. Well, starting later, starting at the beginning of April, Adrian, I'm glad you can make it too. We are going to be a little bit later, so you won't have to worry so much for that. Keenan says, would you still trust me if Soros backed me? Absolutely not, Keenan. You better hope Soros never backs you. Planet Fatness says Soros has his money everywhere. Indeed, he does. Keenan says, McCluskey. Yes, that's the name of the couple that were seen on their porch holding their guns on that summer evening. Chucky says the 2022 Alaska's at-large congressional district special election was held on August 16, 2022. Democrat Mary Peltola won the open seat, thereby becoming the first of her party. Not sure where the rest of that is. Hello, Planet Fatness. Mary Peltola is a congressperson from Alaska and is a Dem non. Not sure. Keenan says, for me to go to bed because I look tired. Thanks very much. I really appreciate that. I am tired, but it's not a big deal. I got my second win there, so not worried about it. Did y'all see the video of the LA teachers dancing? Asks Serenko. Yes, that's a really, really good one. Incredibly cringeworthy. You should check it out. And you should know that that district receives $30,000 per student per year, and it's still not good enough for those ridiculous teachers. So, you know what? Before we go, I actually really wanted to read this earlier today. So we're going to wrap with this. I'm just going to read this and then we're going to close it. Thank you guys all so much for participating in this with me. It's been a lot of fun. Let's look at this. Mystery of the shipwreck that was uncovered under the 9/11 ruins. Now we'll see if YouTube demonetizes me for mentioning those two numbers. The devastating attacks on the World Trade Center left the world in an inconsolable state of shock. For years, people grieved. Politicians and security specialists focused on the terrorists, and military efforts were ramped up to the extreme. That's right. In fact, that's how they passed the Patriot Act, which was terrible. That's probably why it wasn't until years later that something very curious was discovered beneath the rubble of the World Trade Center. What was it? I'm so curious. In 2010, when construction workers were rebuilding the site, they stumbled upon an old wooden ship. The obvious question was, how on earth did a centuries-old ship wind up 22 feet below the Twin Towers? Archaeologists immediately got investigating. After 4 years of digging and analyzing and studying, they were able to determine that the ship had been built in the 1770s, around the same era as the Declaration of Independence. Amazing. Researchers also determined that the type of oak used to build the ship would have come from Philadelphia. Strangest of all was that the rings on the wooden hull matched other samples of wood rings that had been used to build Independence Hall, where both the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution were signed. And that's where my mind was officially blown. That's crazy. The mysterious ship was later identified as a Hudson River sloop, which would have been designed by the Dutch to carry cargo and mass passengers over the Hudson River's rocky floor. So how on earth did it end up there? Well, it's believed that after 20 to 30 years of service, the ship was sailed to the lower Manhattan area where it sunk. Historians aren't sure whether the ship sank accidentally or was purposely submerged. In the decades that followed, the ship's remains were covered with rubbish, debris, and other material like rock and soil that were used to expand the area of Manhattan. Oysters were also found on the hull of the ship, suggesting that it submerged for quite some time before it was buried with trash and landfilled to form the land that the Twin Towers would eventually be built on. Speaking to CNN about the discovery back in 2014, archaeologist Molly McDonald, who was among those who first discovered the ship, said it's such an intense site already based on the recent history, so to be in the midst of this urban, modern, very fraught location and then be sitting on what was a river bottom with clams and fish and the smell of low tide was really an amazing juxtaposition. Today, the remains of the ship are being conserved and exhibited at Albany in the New York State Museum, so you can marvel at the bizarre discovery for yourself. I just thought that was very cool. Wanted to share that with you guys. I am done for the evening. It's time for me to go make dinner and go to bed. Until next time, I will see you all later. That it will be Monday, and we're moving much closer to the time when this is when we start, not when we end. So starting in April, we're going to start going live at 7 p.m. Thank you all again for joining me. Until next time, bye guys. How's it going?